Sarah had been working at the diner spot for 3 years, a cozy, no-frills diner located in the heart of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a small square building with faded signage and a few mismatched chairs in the dining area. But to Sarah, it was home. Every day, she came in to serve meals and offer a smile, embodying the values her parents had instilled in her: hard work, kindness, and respect for others. Even though the job didn't come with a fancy paycheck or easy hours, it had always given her a sense of purpose. Sarah was content in her quiet way, enjoying the routine of serving regular customers and the familiarity of the old-timers who came in for their morning coffee. However, things weren't as simple behind the scenes. The diner spot was struggling, the pay was low, the hours long, and the management hardly ever seemed present. There was a feeling that the diner's values were being overlooked in favor of keeping things running efficiently, even if that meant cutting corners. Sarah often found herself frustrated by the lack of support from management, particularly from the higher-ups who spent most of their time away from the front lines. They barely seemed to care about the well-being of the employees, and it showed in the way the staff interacted with one another and the customers. Despite all of this, Sarah still believed in doing the right thing. She treated every customer with the utmost respect, regardless of how they looked or how much they spent. After all, to Sarah, every person deserved the same level of kindness, no matter their background. Sarah's commitment to treating people with kindness wasn't always easy, especially when she saw her colleagues, like Beth and Jason, treating customers unfairly. It wasn't uncommon for them to show preference to customers who looked like they had money to spend, while those who appeared to be working class or didn't fit the ideal customer mold were often rushed, ignored, or treated coldly. It was disheartening for Sarah to witness, but she never felt like she could speak up. Her role was clear: just do her job, keep her head down, and avoid rocking the boat. She had learned the hard way that speaking out could lead to consequences, and she didn't want to jeopardize her job or the paycheck that helped pay her bills. Despite the negativity around her, Sarah remained steadfast in her own work ethic. She never let the unkindness of others affect how she treated customers. Every morning, she greeted the regulars with a smile, remembered their orders, and made sure they felt welcome. She believed that kindness, even when it wasn't reciprocated, was still the right thing to do. She saw herself as part of the community of the diner spot, a small but important piece of a bigger puzzle. It was a simple way of life, but it kept her grounded and gave her a sense of pride in her work. She may not have had control over the management or the overall culture of the diner, but she had control over how she treated others, and that, to her, was enough. But as much as Sarah tried to focus on her own actions and not the dysfunction around her, it was becoming harder to ignore the cracks in the system. There was a growing divide between the way she and a few other employees tried to work, offering genuine service and kindness, and the way management and some of the other staff acted. Sarah wasn't blind to the fact that things were slipping through the cracks. The diner was losing its warmth and welcoming atmosphere, and the employees were starting to notice. But no one, including Sarah, really knew how to fix it. The frustration that had been bubbling under the surface for months was starting to boil over, and Sarah couldn't help but feel like something needed to change. But what could she do? She was just another waitress, and change, it seemed, was out of her reach. Despite her growing concerns, Sarah continued to show up every day, trying to do her best for the customers and for herself. But deep down, she knew that if things kept going the way they were, the diner would eventually lose everything that made it special. And Sarah would be left standing there, trying to do the right thing, while everything she believed in seemed to fall apart. The pressure was building, and she couldn't help but wonder, how long could she keep this up? Would she ever be able to change anything? Or was she destined to be just another cog in a machine that didn't care? One quiet evening, Sarah was going about her usual duties at the diner spot. The usual lull between the dinner rush and late-night orders gave her a moment of respite, a rare instance where she could catch her breath and check in with the regulars. The hum of the diner's fluorescent lights mixed with the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and everything seemed calm. That was until the bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of a new customer. An older black man walked in, wearing a simple button-up shirt and slacks. His clothes were clean, though slightly worn, and he moved with a quiet confidence. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Sarah's attention. It was the way the other staff reacted to him. As soon as he stepped inside, Sarah noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Her colleagues, Beth and Jason, didn't even acknowledge him, not even a glance in his direction. Their indifference was striking. Beth, who usually greeted customers with a smile or a wave, didn't even look up from her phone. Jason, who had been chatting with another server just moments before, paused, made brief eye contact with the man, and quickly returned to his conversation, ignoring the new arrival completely. The man stood there for a moment, as if waiting for someone to welcome him, but the cold silence in the air told him all he needed to know. He wasn't the type of customer they wanted to serve. Sarah could see the hesitation in his eyes, the brief moment of doubt, before he took a step further into the diner. Sarah had seen this happen before. She had witnessed her colleagues treat people differently based on how they looked, whether it was the clothes they wore, the color of their skin, or the way they carried themselves. It was a behavior Sarah had long disliked, but had learned to ignore. She had kept her head down, doing her job, and trying not to rock the boat. But tonight, something was different. Seeing the man standing there, clearly unsure about whether he was welcome, sparked something inside Sarah. She had always believed in kindness, in showing respect to every customer, no matter who they were. This was her opportunity to make a difference, to break from the pattern of indifference that had taken root at the diner spot. With a quick glance at Beth and Jason, Sarah made her decision. She grabbed a menu from the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to the man. "Evening, sir," she greeted him warmly. He looked up, surprised but visibly relieved to be acknowledged. "Just you tonight?" she asked, her tone light and casual. The man nodded, his eyes softening as he gave a small smile. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady but with a hint of weariness. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that by simply offering him kindness, she was going against the current. But she didn't hesitate. "Right this way," she said, gesturing toward a booth near the window. "Is this all right for you?" The man nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. As they walked to the booth, Sarah handed him a menu and asked if he'd like a drink. "Coffee, black?" she asked, already moving toward the coffee machine. "That would be perfect," he replied. Sarah quickly brewed the coffee, knowing exactly how he liked it, without the need for further instructions. She set the cup down in front of him with a warm smile, her actions purposeful and kind. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she moved to return to the kitchen, she noticed the cold, disapproving stares of Beth and Jason, who were both standing by the counter. Beth's eyes were narrowed, and Jason was shaking his head, smirking, as if to say, "What's the point?" Sarah felt the sting of their judgment, but she didn't let it affect her. She had done the right thing. As she walked past them, she overheard Beth muttering just loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Wasting her time." Sarah's chest tightened with frustration, but she kept her composure and carried on. She didn't let the negativity from her co-workers overshadow her belief in treating people with dignity. However, as the night wore on and Sarah continued to serve the rest of the customers, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The tension in the air was thick, and she knew that her actions, simple as they were, hadn't gone unnoticed by her co-workers. Later that evening, as Sarah took a quick break, she caught sight of Beth whispering something to Jason, both of them glancing over at her with clear disdain. She had expected some reaction, but not this much. She had hoped that her small act of kindness would be seen for what it was, a simple gesture of humanity. But it was clear that wasn't the case. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted, and Sarah couldn't ignore the reality that her actions had put her at odds with her colleagues, but deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. Treating people with respect, no matter their background, had always been Sarah's core value. It was who she was, and it was the kind of person she strived to be every single day. As she returned to the floor to finish her shift, Sarah had no idea that her choice to help one customer would set into motion a chain of events that would lead her to a place she never expected to be. Her simple act of kindness had cost her the approval of her colleagues, but it had also brought her closer to the values she had always believed in. Little did she know, that night would be the last time she served customers as just another waitress at the diner spot. The morning sun had barely risen as Sarah drove to work, her mind replaying the events of the night before. The warmth from the diner, the kindness she had shown the older man, and the discomfort that followed. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It had been a slow night, and yet something about the atmosphere felt tense. As she pulled into the parking lot of the diner spot, she tried to put her concerns aside. She adjusted her apron, took a deep breath, and stepped out of her car, preparing herself for another day. Walking into the diner, the usual hum of the kitchen and chatter of the waitstaff greeted her, but there was something off in the air today. The usual banter was replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to settle over the entire room. As Sarah hung her coat and tied her apron, she noticed Beth and Jason talking in hushed tones by the counter, their eyes flickering to her occasionally, but neither of them said a word. She tried to shrug it off, but a growing unease settled in her stomach. Something felt different today, but she couldn't quite pinpoint why. A few minutes later, her stomach tightened as she saw John, the manager, walk toward her. His expression was serious, even tense, and he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he gave a curt nod and motioned for her to follow him. "Sarah, come with me," he said, his tone flat and emotionless. Confused and slightly alarmed, Sarah followed him to the back office, her heart beginning to race. The room was small and cluttered with papers, a few chairs scattered around, and the faint smell of old coffee lingering in the air. She had been in this office countless times, but today the atmosphere felt charged, suffocating even. As soon as the door closed behind them, John took a seat behind his desk, and Sarah stood awkwardly on the other side. "Sarah, it's not working out," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Sarah blinked, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. "What? Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't missed a shift, had never been late. She had always shown up, done her job, and worked with kindness and respect. "There's no easy way to put it," John replied, shifting in his seat. "It's just not working out. We've decided to move in a different direction." Confusion and disbelief washed over Sarah. She felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. "But I've been here almost 3 years," she said, her voice shaking. "I've never missed a shift. I've always worked hard. What's going on?" John let out a sigh, clearly uncomfortable, but not offering any explanation. "It's just a business decision," he said, finally meeting her eyes for the first time. "I'm sorry, but it's final." The words cut through her like a knife. She felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. This wasn't just a business decision. It was personal. She was being fired because of the choice she had made the night before to treat a customer with dignity and respect. Sarah's chest tightened as the truth hit her. She knew deep down that her firing was a direct consequence of what had happened the night before. It wasn't about her performance or her dedication to the job. It was about doing the right thing. By helping the older man, by choosing kindness over indifference, she had crossed an unspoken line at the diner spot. She had defied the culture of favoritism and bias that ran beneath the surface of the restaurant. The thought of it made her blood run cold. She had done nothing but her job, treated a customer as she would want to be treated, and now she was being punished for it. The injustice of it all was suffocating. Sarah stood there, trying to wrap her head around what was happening. How could this be her fault? How could something so simple, just doing her job with integrity, lead to her being thrown out without warning, without any real explanation? The answer was clear. It was the culture of the diner. A culture that allowed employees to treat others based on their appearance and status, to dismiss people who didn't fit a certain mold. Sarah had stood up against that culture, and now she was paying the price. As she walked out of the office, her legs felt heavy, as if they were carrying the weight of the world. She passed by Beth and Jason, who didn't even look at her. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, but Sarah didn't care. She had done nothing wrong. She had treated a customer with respect. She had acted with dignity. And yet, here she was, walking out of the very place she had called home for 3 years, without even a chance to explain herself. She walked through the front doors and out into the cold morning air, the weight of her termination settling heavily on her shoulders. The world felt different now. She was no longer the waitress who had worked tirelessly for low pay and long hours. She was now just another person, discarded for doing the right thing. As she climbed into her car, she took a deep breath and slammed her hands against the steering wheel. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She was fired, and it was all because she had chosen to help someone in need. The cold air outside felt like a slap to Sarah's face as she sat in her car, processing everything that had just happened. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of how she had gone from a loyal employee, committed to doing the right thing, to being fired for simply treating a customer with kindness. It didn't make sense. She had always been the one to keep her head down, to ignore the unfair treatment of others. But last night, something had clicked. She had done what she believed was right, and now she was paying the price for it. But as she sat there, her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, breaking the silence that had filled her thoughts. Startled, Sarah picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but something told her it was important. Hesitant but curious, she answered. "Hello?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. A deep, calm voice greeted her on the other end. "Sarah, this is Michael Stewart." The name didn't immediately register in her mind, but the next words caused her to freeze. "I'm the customer you served last night at the diner's spot." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the voice instantly. The same man she had treated with respect, offering him the kind of service she believed every customer deserved. "Oh," she whispered, her mind spinning. Michael continued, his tone steady yet sincere. "I wanted to call and personally let you know that I saw everything." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he meant. "I'm sorry?" she said, confused. "You were a customer last night? Are you—" She trailed off, her mind struggling to catch up. Michael laughed softly. "Yes, I was there undercover," he said. "I owned the diner spot. I was testing the management, the staff, and how our customers were being treated. And I have to say, your professionalism and kindness didn't go unnoticed." Sarah's thoughts whirled. "Undercover? You were testing us?" The words hung heavy in the air. Sarah couldn't wrap her mind around it. "I was," Michael confirmed. "I wanted to understand how my employees were being treated and how they treated others. I wanted to see firsthand if the culture I built for the diner spot was being upheld. And you, Sarah, were the only one who showed genuine respect and kindness to a customer, regardless of who they were or what they looked like." Sarah's chest tightened with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "So, you saw everything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Michael replied. "And you were the one who made a real difference that night. But there's something I need to tell you." Sarah held her breath as she waited for his next words. Michael's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "I allowed you to be fired on purpose, Sarah. It wasn't because I wanted to punish you or because of your actions. It was part of the test. I needed to know how far the issues with my staff went. I needed to see who was truly upholding the values I started this company with. I needed to see if employees like you were being mistreated, or if the problems ran deeper." The words hit Sarah like a wave, crashing over her and leaving her breathless. "You let them fire me?" she asked, unable to process it all. "Why?" "I needed to understand if the way employees are treated is a reflection of my company's values," Michael explained. "And unfortunately, I learned a lot more than I expected. The way the staff treated you, and how you were treated after you showed kindness, spoke volumes. I can't allow that kind of behavior to continue in my business." Sarah sat there, her mind reeling. She had been a part of the problem, unknowingly, and now everything seemed to fall into place. Michael's voice softened. "I know this wasn't fair to you, and I'm sorry for that. But the good news is, this is far from the end of your story. It's the beginning of a change." Sarah blinked, still struggling to understand what was happening. A change? She asked. Yes, Michael affirmed. I'm going to make things right. I'm offering you the chance to come back, not just as an employee, but as the new manager. You showed integrity, respect, and the heart that this company needs. I want you to lead the diner spot into a new chapter, where employees and customers are treated with the dignity they deserve. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Wait, you want me to come back, as the manager? Yes, Michael said, his tone now firm and clear. I want you to take charge, to lead the staff with the values I built this company on. I can't do it alone, and I need someone who understands how to treat people right. You were the only one who showed that last night, and that's why I'm offering you this opportunity. Sarah sat there in stunned silence. She had gone from being fired to being offered the very position she never thought she would have. I don't know what to say, she murmured, her voice cracking with emotion. Michael smiled on the other end of the line. You don't have to say anything yet, but I need you to think about it, Sarah. You have the chance to change things, to be the change that this company needs. As Sarah sat there, processing everything Michael had just said, she couldn't help but feel a surge of hope mixed with disbelief. Less than 24 hours ago, she had walked out of the diner spot with nothing. Now, she was being offered the opportunity to return, not just as an employee, but as the manager. Something she never could have imagined. She took a deep breath, her mind still reeling from the whirlwind of emotions. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice steady and resolute. I'll come back, and I'll make sure things change. Good, Michael replied. I knew you would. As she hung up the phone, Sarah sat for a moment in stunned silence. Her world had just turned upside down, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a chance to make a real difference. The phone call ended, and Sarah sat in her car, the weight of Michael's words still hanging heavily in the air. It had been just a few moments ago that she had been staring at her phone, stunned and unsure of what had just happened. One minute she had walked out of the restaurant, jobless and frustrated, and the next minute she was being offered a chance to lead the very same restaurant as its manager. Michael's words echoed in her mind. You have the integrity and respect that this company needs. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Me as a manager. It felt surreal. But as she sat there, the reality of the situation slowly began to sink in. She had been fired just the day before, a victim of the toxic culture that had taken root at the restaurant. Sarah had always prided herself on her work ethic, her ability to serve customers with kindness, and her unwavering belief in doing the right thing. But she had learned the hard way that doing the right thing wasn't always celebrated. She'd been dismissed for showing compassion, for offering help to a customer who had been unfairly ignored. That was the company culture she had been part of, one that rewarded indifference and punished kindness. But now, Michael Stewart, the CEO of the diner spot, had not only seen what had happened, but also recognized her potential. Sarah's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she replayed Michael's words in her mind. You're the one I want. You're the right fit for this job. It was hard for her to believe. How could he trust her after everything that had happened? After being thrown out the door by her colleagues? She had felt humiliated and betrayed by the very people she had worked alongside. But now she was being offered the chance to take control, to reshape the company's culture. It was a dream come true, or a nightmare waiting to happen. Her doubts swirled. Could she really do this? As Sarah sat in her car, the weight of the decision pressing down on her, she thought about what had led her to this point. For the last 3 years, she had worked tirelessly, staying late, covering shifts, doing everything she could to make the restaurant a better place. And yet, all her hard work had been ignored, and she had been fired for trying to make a simple, decent choice. The bitterness from that night still lingered in her chest, but now there was also a glimmer of hope. Michael had seen something in her that no one else had. He believed in her. She thought about the other employees she worked with, the ones who had treated customers with disdain, who had made cruel assumptions based on a person's appearance. She thought about the long shifts and the broken promises of management, the blatant disregard for anyone who wasn't seen as valuable enough in their eyes. Was she really ready to be the one to change that? Sarah wondered. Could she overcome the toxic culture that had permeated the restaurant, or would she just become another part of it? Her heart raced at the thought. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't walk away from this opportunity. This was a chance to make things right, to stand up for what was right, and to finally build the kind of work environment she had always dreamed of. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She would go back. She would take on the challenge. She would lead the diner spot to a new era, one where respect and fairness weren't just words, but values that everyone lived by. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew the resistance she would face. But Sarah had always believed that doing the right thing was worth fighting for, even if it meant going up against the odds. And now she was going to be the one in charge. It was her turn to set the tone, to show her colleagues that kindness and respect weren't weaknesses, they were strengths. Sarah's phone buzzed once again, and she looked at the screen, knowing it was Michael calling to follow up. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, her resolve hardening. "Hello, Michael," she said as she answered the call, her voice steady. "I'm ready. I'll do it." Michael's voice broke through with a note of satisfaction, though he sounded more like a mentor than a boss. "I knew you would. Welcome to your new role, Sarah. I'm confident you'll make a real difference." For the first time in days, Sarah felt a sense of purpose. She had been knocked down, humiliated, and discarded, but now she had been given the power to change it all. The diner spot wouldn't just be a place to work, it would be a place of respect and integrity, where employees could thrive. She wasn't just going to manage the restaurant, she was going to transform it. And in doing so, she would ensure that every person who walked through those doors would feel valued, no matter who they were or what they looked like. As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt her nerves settle. She was ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to step into the role she was born to take. Tomorrow, she would walk into the diner spot as the new manager, but she wouldn't just be managing the store, she would be managing the culture. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt confident that the changes she was about to make would ripple through not just her restaurant, but the entire company. This was just the beginning. Sarah walked through the door of the diner spot, her heart racing but her mind clear. The familiar scent of coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, but today everything felt different. Today, she wasn't just another waitress going through the motions. Today, she was the manager. The very thought of it still seemed surreal. As she stepped into the dining room, the eyes of her former co-workers, Rachel, Mark, and John, were fixed on her. Their expressions a mix of disbelief and unease. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her to come back, not as the same person they had tossed aside the day before, but as someone in charge. The tension was thick in the air, a palpable weight that Sarah could almost feel pressing down on her shoulders. Rachel was the first to break eye contact, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pursed. Mark, standing near the counter, shot Sarah a quick glance before quickly turning away. And then there was John, who had always been the most vocal in his disdain for Sarah's way of doing things. He stood near the kitchen, not quite looking at her, but his discomfort was unmistakable. She knew they were all expecting her to be different now, expecting her to follow the same rules that had governed the restaurant for so long, but she was determined not to. Today was about change. Today was about setting things right. As Sarah made her way to the back office, she took a deep breath. This was her moment, her chance to make sure that the values she had always stood by, the ones she had fought for when no one else would now take root in the very place that had once let her down. She was no longer going to let the toxic environment that had been allowed to fester for so long continue. This was her responsibility now, and she was going to make sure that everyone who walked through the doors of the diner spot was treated with the respect they deserved. No more bad attitudes, no more favoritism, no more dismissiveness. When Sarah stepped into the office, she saw John immediately tense up. He was sitting at his desk, but his posture was stiff and his eyes avoided hers. Rachel and Mark were hanging out near the register, their whispered conversation stopping as Sarah entered. She didn't acknowledge them immediately. She needed them to feel the weight of the silence, the change in the air. She walked to the front of the room, settled herself behind the counter, and straightened up. She was now the one in control. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice firm but calm. "There are a few things we need to discuss. First, I want to make it clear that the old way of doing things is over. From now on, every customer who walks in here will be treated with the respect they deserve. No exceptions." She paused, letting her words sink in. "If you're not here to do your job with integrity, if you can't treat people with kindness, then this isn't the place for you. I don't tolerate mistreatment, not from customers and not from employees." The room was silent. Rachel and Mark exchanged uneasy glances, their bodies rigid, and Sarah could see them trying to adjust to the new reality. John didn't even look up, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk in front of him. Sarah could tell that he was still holding on to the old way of doing things, the dismissiveness, the lack of care, but it was time for that to end. Sarah had made her decision, and she wasn't backing down. Just as the tension seemed to hang in the air for a moment longer, the door to the office opened, and in stepped Michael Stewart, the CEO of the diner spot. Sarah had been expecting this. Michael had supported her through this whole process, and now he was here to reinforce her authority. His presence was a silent reminder to everyone in the room that this wasn't just her decision. It was the company's decision to take a different direction. Michael walked up to Sarah, a brief nod of acknowledgement passing between them, and then he turned toward John, his voice calm but resolute. "John," Michael began, his tone carrying a weight of finality, "effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as the store manager. We've seen enough, and it's time for a change." John's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the words. But no words came. He slowly stood up from his chair, his eyes averted, and walked out of the office without saying a word. Sarah watched him go, and while a part of her felt pity for him, another part felt a sense of justice being served. With John gone, Sarah's gaze moved to Rachel and Mark. They were still standing near the counter, unsure of what to do next. Michael's voice broke through the silence again. "Sarah's now in charge," he said, his words hanging heavy in the air. "She's the one who will lead this place moving forward, and it's her way or the highway. The rest of you need to make a choice. Adapt to the new culture or find somewhere else to work." The words were clear, and the message couldn't have been more direct. Sarah knew that some of the employees would resist. Change was never easy, especially when the old way had been ingrained for so long. But she was ready for it. She had no intention of letting anyone ruin this chance to make things right. As the morning unfolded, Sarah began to implement the first of many changes. The staff was still on edge, but they could feel the difference. No longer would employees be allowed to ignore customers. No longer would certain workers get special treatment while others were left to do all the heavy lifting. Sarah was taking charge, and the store's atmosphere was already starting to shift. She could see it in the way the staff interacted with the customers, in the way they spoke to each other. The day passed, and though it was a challenge, Sarah could feel a sense of purpose driving her forward. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the one responsible for making sure the place ran smoothly. As she looked around the restaurant, watching the employees begin to adjust to the new environment, she felt a sense of pride. This was her chance to make a difference, to lead by example, and to ensure that everyone who walked through the diner spot's doors would feel welcome, valued, and respected. It wasn't going to be easy, but Sarah knew she was ready for the challenge. In the weeks following Sarah's promotion to manager, she worked tirelessly to instill a new culture at the diner spot, one based on respect, inclusivity, and accountability. It wasn't an easy transition, but Sarah knew that if she wanted the restaurant to reflect her values, she would have to be consistent and lead by example. She began by holding regular meetings with her team, regardless of the importance of treating every customer with kindness, regardless of their background or appearance. She made it clear that this wasn't just about making the restaurant look good. It was about creating an environment where both the employees and customers felt valued. She wanted every team member to understand that their actions, their words, and their attitudes mattered. For the first time in a long while, the staff started to see that someone cared about them, not just as workers, but as people. Sarah also implemented new training programs for the team, focusing on customer service, leadership, and communication. She brought in experts to run these sessions, ensuring that each employee had the skills they needed to serve customers with professionalism and care. But the training didn't stop there. Sarah also introduced leadership programs for her senior staff, helping them understand how to manage their teams with empathy and respect. She made it clear that being a leader wasn't just about giving orders. It was about supporting your team, listening to their concerns, and leading by example. No longer would employees be left to fend for themselves or work in isolation. Sarah encouraged them to work together, share ideas, and support each other. She held her staff accountable for their actions, ensuring that any mistreatment of customers or other employees would be addressed immediately. If someone made a mistake, they were given the chance to learn and grow. But Sarah wouldn't tolerate negligence or disrespect, and she made that crystal clear. At first, the changes were met with skepticism from some employees. They had grown accustomed to the old ways, the cliques, the favoritism, the low expectations. But Sarah's determination and consistency began to make an impact. Employees who had once felt overlooked or mistreated started to speak up. They started sharing their ideas and concerns, knowing that their voices would be heard. Sarah made it a point to check in with her team regularly, offering feedback, praise, and support when needed. The energy in the restaurant began to shift as employees realized they could work in an environment where they were treated with dignity and respect. They started taking more pride in their work, showing up with a positive attitude, and holding each other accountable. The once toxic atmosphere slowly gave way to something much healthier and more productive. The customers were the next to notice the changes. At first, it was subtle: an extra smile, a kind word, a quicker response time. But over time, the difference became more noticeable. The restaurant had a new energy about it. The staff was more engaged, more attentive, and more motivated to provide excellent service. Customers who had once avoided the diner spot for its lack of warmth and professionalism now found themselves coming back again and again, drawn by the positive shift they saw in the restaurant. Word spread quickly, and before long the restaurant was seeing an uptick in both customer satisfaction and foot traffic. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride every time she heard a customer compliment the service or thank a server for going above and beyond. She knew that these changes weren't just about improving the bottom line. They were about improving the lives of everyone who worked there. The improvements in customer service were only part of the story. As the staff became more engaged and motivated, they began to take more initiative. They offered suggestions for how to improve the menu, the layout of the restaurant, and the overall customer experience. The kitchen staff, who had previously kept their heads down, began speaking up more, sharing their ideas and helping to streamline operations. The front-of-house employees became more collaborative, working together as a cohesive unit instead of in silos. Sarah could see the shift in the way her team interacted with one another. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie, and for the first time in a long while, the restaurant felt like a true team effort. People were no longer just working for a paycheck. They were working because they believed in what the diner spot stood for. As Sarah looked around the restaurant, she could see the tangible impact of the changes she had made. The once overworked employees now had a renewed sense of purpose. They no longer felt like cogs in a machine. They felt like valued members of a team, each with their own unique contributions to offer. And the best part? The improvements weren't just limited to the staff. The customers felt it too. They saw the difference in the service, in the attitudes of the employees, and in the overall atmosphere of the restaurant. The diner spot was no longer just a place to grab a quick bite. It was a place where people felt welcomed, respected, and cared for. And that was exactly the kind of place Sarah had always envisioned. Over time, the impact of Sarah's leadership became even more evident. The diner spot was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a model of what a workplace could be when the values of respect, kindness, and inclusivity were prioritized. Sarah had succeeded in transforming the culture, and the results spoke for themselves. Employees were happier, customers were satisfied, and the restaurant was thriving. As Sarah looked back on the journey, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. The road had been long and challenging, but she had stayed true to her values, and in doing so, she had created something truly special. The diner spot wasn't just a job, it was a place where people could thrive, both as employees and as human beings, and Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. If you found this story inspiring and want to see more real-life transformations, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the Deep Inside HQ community. Share this story with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can continue sharing powerful stories that make a difference. Stay tuned for more incredible journeys of change and leadership. Thanks for watching, and remember, change starts with you.